A powerful millionaire CEO thought he had everything until two little girls called him daddy, and shattered everything he thought he knew. Stay with me. This one will stay in your heart long after it ends. Before we dive into this heart-touching story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? The sharp scent of antiseptic drifted from the hospital entrance as two small figures stood beneath the gray overhang, their curly blonde hair tousled by the summer wind, hands tightly clasped as they scanned the rushing crowd, eyes wide and shimmering like morning dew under anxious lashes, until suddenly, their gaze locked on a tall man in a flawless blue tailored suit, his tie neatly knotted, his polished shoes clicking confidently against the sidewalk. A man who looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not near broken hearts. Lily, dressed in her sharp pink frock, nudged her sister Bella, who wore bright yellow, and whispered, "That's him. Mommy said he wears blue like the sky, and has eyes like water," and without hesitation, their small feet carried them toward him. Dominic Hayes, known to Wall Street as ruthless, calculated, and emotionally untouchable, had just ended a heated call when he heard the softest voice call out, "Daddy?" A single word that sliced through the noise of city horns and hospital chaos like a lightning bolt straight to the soul. He turned instinctively, brows drawn, confusion knitting his perfectly smooth forehead as he looked down at the two girls who stood inches from him, wide-eyed and trembling but brave enough to step closer. "Daddy," Bella echoed, louder this time, her voice cracking slightly, her tiny hand reaching for the hem of his blazer as if clinging to hope itself. Dominic froze, his breath catching in his throat, heart stumbling out of rhythm. Those faces, so angelic, so hauntingly familiar, stirred something buried beneath years of hardened silence and corporate walls. He scanned their features, the delicate noses, the golden curls, the ocean blue eyes that mirrored his own so intensely it made his spine tighten, yet his mind screamed impossible. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" he muttered, voice low, trying to summon his cold executive tone, but it faltered in the face of the soft desperation in their expressions. "Mommy said if anything happened, to find you," Lily whispered, clutching Bella's hand tighter. "She showed us your picture. We know you're our daddy." Dominic's mouth went dry, his mind spiraling. Picture? Mommy? Daddy? None of this made sense, and yet the girls stood with such certainty, such raw innocence, it felt like the world had stopped spinning just long enough for the truth to bleed through. His surroundings blurred, the honk of a distant taxi, the rushing footsteps of nurses, the smell of rain on the sidewalk all became background noise to the thunder in his chest. "Where's your mother?" he asked, the words barely forming, his eyes now full of alarm instead of disbelief. Bella's lip trembled as she whispered, "Inside. She fainted last night, and the doctor said she might not wake up." Dominic's heart plummeted like a stone in dark water, and the image of a woman from his past, a memory he tried to erase, began to push through the cracks of his carefully guarded life. "What's her name?" he demanded, not knowing why he felt this deep need to ask, fearing the answer. "Sophia Lane," Lily replied gently, and the name hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. The air in his lungs vanished. Sophia, the woman he loved, then left behind, the woman whose absence haunted his most silent moments, was here, behind those hospital doors, fighting for her life? His knees nearly buckled, but he steadied himself, glancing between the girls and the entrance. "You're saying she's here? Right now?" he asked, his voice cracked with something he hadn't felt in years. "Fear." "Please," Bella said, tugging again at his sleeve, "we didn't know who else to go to. You're our only family now." A lump formed in Dominic's throat, and the businessman in him collapsed as something deeper, something ancient and paternal, took over. He knelt slowly, looking them both in the eyes, seeing not just himself in their gaze but pieces of Sophia too, her softness, her strength, her fire. "I'll take you to her," he whispered, the decision already made. He offered each a hand, and when their tiny fingers slipped into his palms, something unspoken passed between them, an unbreakable thread that had always existed, just waiting to be found. As they walked through the sliding hospital doors together, Dominic's mind raced, heart aching with memories of a love lost, choices made in ambition, and the terrifying thought that maybe the family he never knew he had was standing right beside him, and he'd already missed 8 years of their lives. He didn't know what awaited him behind that ICU door, but one thing was certain: the past he tried so hard to bury had come alive, and it was calling him Daddy. As Dominic walked between the twin girls through the sterile corridors of the hospital, every step echoed with questions he wasn't ready to answer, and yet couldn't stop asking himself how could he have been so blind, so far removed from a life that had clearly continued without him, silently growing, breathing, aching. Lily glanced up at him as they reached the elevator and softly said, "Mommy always said you might show up one day, if we ever needed you bad enough." Her voice fragile like tissue paper, soaked in rain, as if her hope had been quietly waiting to be proven right. Bella nodded with a small, solemn frown. "We needed you now, because Mommy's really sick." The weight of their words pressed hard on Dominic's chest as the elevator doors slid shut, the hum of its ascent somehow louder than anything he'd ever heard in his boardroom victories. He turned to look at them fully for the first time since they'd entered the hospital, tiny, determined, full of secrets they didn't know they carried, and something shifted inside him, something old, buried beneath years of cold ambition and polished success. "What happened to her?" he asked, but it came out more like a plea than a question. "She was coughing and couldn't breathe. Then she fainted in the kitchen," Lily said, her hands twisting the hem of her dress. Bella added, "The doctor said her heart is tired. Too tired." Dominic's throat tightened, and he silently cursed his own memory for failing to remember every little thing about Sophia: how she laughed, how her eyes narrowed when she worried, how her heart always beat too hard for others. When the elevator opened to the ICU floor, the fluorescent lighting felt harsh, almost accusing, as though the sterile air itself knew he didn't belong here, not yet. A nurse glanced up, then down at the girls, and gently led them through a quiet hallway to a private room where the only sound was the steady, rhythmic beep of a monitor keeping time with what little strength Sophia had left. Dominic hesitated at the threshold, suddenly unsure if he even had the right to step inside. But Bella gently tugged his hand, whispering, "She'd want to see you, even if she doesn't open her eyes." That one sentence carried the kind of forgiveness he didn't think he deserved, but needed more than anything. He stepped in, heart thunderous, breath slow, and when his eyes landed on Sophia, pale and fragile beneath tangled four lines and pale blue sheets, it was as if the past had risen and slapped him across the face. She looked so small, so still, nothing like the vibrant woman he remembered arguing with, laughing with, loving deeply then losing bitterly. Her lips were slightly parted, chest rising gently, and for the first time in years, he whispered her name aloud, Sophia, like a confession. The girls moved to her side without hesitation, each holding one of her hands, and Dominic stayed frozen at the foot of the bed, unable to take a full breath. He remembered the day he walked away, choosing a merger over marriage, headlines over home, and though he'd buried the regret beneath spreadsheets and skyscrapers, it was now crawling back like smoke from a long-forgotten fire. Lily looked up at him with tear-filled certainty and said, "She still loves you, she just stopped believing you'd ever come back." That truth hit harder than any boardroom betrayal ever had. "I didn't know," he muttered, but his voice cracked under the weight of it all because deep down, a part of him had always wondered where she'd gone, why she never reached out, and why he never tried harder. Bella stood suddenly and walked to him, wrapping her small arms around his waist as if to keep him from floating away in guilt. "It's okay, Daddy. You're here now," she whispered, and though he didn't feel worthy of it, Dominic slowly knelt and hugged her back, the first real embrace he'd given in years. A machine beeped louder behind him, a sharp reminder that time was not a luxury here, not like in his corner office or penthouse suite. It was fragile, slipping, bleeding through the cracks. As the doctor quietly entered and updated them with cautious words about critical conditions and uncertain outcomes, Dominic barely heard him. All he could think of was the woman lying in that bed and the two little girls calling him Daddy, with complete trust, as if they'd been waiting all their lives for him to arrive, and the terrifying thought that maybe he hadn't just lost years, she was at risk of losing everything before he even understood what he had. When the doctor left, Dominic turned back to Sophia, his voice now raw, trembling. "I'm here now, Soph. I swear I won't walk away again." The twins said nothing, but each of them reached for one of his hands, and in that moment, for the first time in forever, Dominic didn't feel powerful, or rich, or successful. He just felt human. Dominic stood inches from the hospital bed, staring at Sophia as if she were both a ghost and a prayer, her body still, her skin pale beneath the harsh hospital lights, a tangle of IV tubes running into her frail arms, and the steady beep of machines keeping rhythm with a life that once held him whole. His throat tightened as the years between them collapsed in a heartbeat, and all the words left unsaid flooded his mind like a storm refusing to be silenced. She didn't look like the fire-hearted woman he remembered who once challenged him, loved him fiercely, fought for their dreams. She looked fragile, like a soul floating on the edge of goodbye. He couldn't move at first, afraid that even the smallest breath would break what little remained of her strength. Slowly, he reached out, fingers hovering near hers, but stopped short of touching, uncertain if he had the right. The man who had built skyscrapers, conquered markets, and led empires now stood helpless beside a woman he once promised the world to, yet left behind like a chapter too painful to reread. His jaw clenched as the memories came rushing in of the shouting match on the apartment balcony, the slammed doors, the long nights of silence, and the day he chose a board meeting over coming home. He had told himself it was mutual, that their love couldn't survive the weight of his ambition, but now, standing there with his daughters in the next room and Sophia slipping away before him, that illusion shattered. She had carried the burden of motherhood alone, hidden 2 entire lives from him, and the question burned in his chest like a fire he couldn't extinguish. Why didn't she tell me? Did she hate him that much? Did she believe he wouldn't care? Or worse, had he proven to her once that he wouldn't? The ache in his chest deepened as he imagined her cooking dinner for 2 tiny girls while juggling rent, hiding tears while pretending to be strong, whispering bedtime stories about a father who never came home. He glanced at the framed photo on the bedside table, Sophia with the twins, smiling in front of a cheap birthday cake, their happiness real, raw, and without him. Shame gripped him like a chain around his throat. He sat slowly in the chair beside her bed, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands, and for the first time in years, the tears came silent, heavy, filled with guilt he had never dared confront. He wondered how many nights she had stayed up, wondering if she should call, if he would answer, if his heart had room left for the family he never knew existed. Why hadn't fate nudged him sooner? Why hadn't he asked more, looked back, searched? And how had he not seen the resemblance at the twin reflections of himself in Lily and Bella's eyes? He rubbed his temple, trying to suppress the thoughts, but Sophia's stillness haunted him, her chest rising just barely under the weight of the white sheet, her lips dry and motionless, yet echoing words from the past he could no longer escape. "You're choosing your company over us." And he had. Regret wrapped itself around him like a suffocating fog, and he leaned closer, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead, whispering, "I didn't know, Soph. If I had known, I swear I would have come." But there was no answer. No flutter of eyelids. Just the cruel silence of a woman caught between life and death, and the man who had walked away before realizing what she truly meant to him. He sat there, hour after hour, watching the machines blink, watching her chest rise and fall with effort, praying she'd wake up not to forgive him, but to at least hear him say it, say he was wrong, that he missed her, that he still remembered the smell of her coffee in the mornings, the way she hummed while folding laundry, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the way she once looked at him like he was everything before ambition turned him into nothing. He thought of the first time he saw her in that yellow sundress by the lake, how they kissed under fireflies, how they once promised forever before life chewed that word into pieces. His hand reached out again, and this time, it touched hers, cold, soft, unmoving. "You didn't have to do this alone," he whispered, and for a moment, he swore her fingers twitched, but maybe it was just hope playing tricks. He looked toward the door, knowing the girls waited just beyond it, probably asking the nurse if their mommy was going to be okay. And he realized he didn't just owe Sophia the truth, he owed those girls the life he never gave them. The room buzzed with machines and guilt, but Dominic didn't leave her side. He couldn't. Not now. Not when the woman behind the curtain of pain and time might still be fighting to find her way back. Dominic hadn't left Sophia's side in hours, his eyes red from tears he couldn't hide and his mind a whirlwind of questions too heavy to silence, when a soft knock broke the silence of the room and the door creaked open just enough for Lily and Bella to step in, their tiny hands holding something wrapped in a crinkled, worn envelope. They looked unsure, as if they were interrupting something sacred, but Dominic turned and opened his arms, welcoming them with a warmth he didn't even recognize in himself. "We brought you something," Lily whispered, walking toward him with careful steps, as though every footfall carried the weight of unspoken truth. Bella handed over the envelope, her fingers hesitant, eyes locked onto his face as though trying to memorize every expression. Dominic opened it slowly, almost afraid of what lay inside, and when he slid the photo free, the air caught in his throat. It was him years younger, smiling, carefree, an arm wrapped around Sophia's shoulders, his cheek pressed to hers, both of them radiant with love and promise, unaware of the storms to come. The edges of the photo were curled, the colors slightly faded, but the emotions it captured burned vividly through time. He blinked, and suddenly he was back in that moment, the smell of lavender in her hair, the breeze lifting her sundress, the quiet laughter they shared when they thought nothing could break them. His hands trembled slightly as he ran his thumb across his own image, the corners of his mouth twitching in disbelief. "Mommy said you used to smile like that all the time," Bella said softly, her voice filled with innocent truth. Dominic looked up, startled by how perfectly the girls mirrored the photo, those same eyes, that same golden curl along the forehead, the same curious tilt of the chin when they smiled. His mind began assembling the timeline, counting backward, doing the math in a haze of disbelief and dawning clarity. 8 years. It had been 8 years since that photo was taken. 8 years since the last time he saw Sophia's eyes lit with love. 8 years since he walked away without knowing he had left pieces of himself behind. His heart pounded, denial clawing for air, but reality shoved it aside. These girls weren't coincidences. They weren't mistaken. They were his. His daughters. And he had missed every first word, every birthday candle, every scraped knee, every nightmare that ended with someone else holding them close. His breath hitched, a sob rising from a place he didn't know existed, a place only a father's regret could reach. "She kept this all these years?" he asked, his voice hoarse as he stared at the photo again, now wet with the sting of unshed tears. Lily nodded, climbing into his lap as if she belonged there, because she did. "She said we could look at it whenever we missed you. We looked at it every night," she whispered, her cheek resting against his chest where his heart now thundered with pain. Bella sat beside them, clutching his arm as though afraid he'd vanish again, and Dominic wrapped his arms around both of them, unsure how he'd survived so long without this feeling. The weight of the photo between his fingers felt heavier than any business deal he'd ever signed. It was proof of a life he should have had. Of years that should have been spent beside Sophia, with these girls growing up under his watch, not in silence. He thought of their first steps, their first drawings, the nights they asked Sophia about their father, and how she must have smiled through the ache, pointing to the same image now digging a canyon of guilt through his soul. He had been too blind to look back, too proud to reach out, and now that truth pressed against his ribs like glass shards. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked aloud, but not to the girls, though, the ceiling, the air, the woman lying unconscious beside them. Maybe Sophia had tried, maybe she feared rejection, or maybe she just wanted to protect her daughters from a man too lost in himself to see what mattered. "We always knew you were our daddy," Bella added gently, lifting his hand and placing it against her heart. "Mommy said it was okay to love someone, even if they didn't know you yet." That broke him. Shattered him. Because somehow, even after everything, Sophia had kept his memory alive, not as a villain, not as a stranger, but as someone worth loving. He kissed the tops of their heads, wishing he could go back, wishing he had followed his gut the night he almost called her 3 years ago, or the day he stood outside her street and drove away instead. "I've wasted so much time," he murmured, more to himself than anyone. Lily tilted her head up, her voice barely a whisper. "Then don't waste now." Those words pierced the fog in his soul, and he looked at both of the missed daughters, knowing this wasn't just a moment of realization, it was a beginning, the beginning of redemption, of learning how to be a father, not just in name, but in every broken, beautiful way that mattered. And for the first time since he arrived, Dominic wasn't afraid to stay. Dominic was still holding the worn photograph, the weight of it pressing against his palm like a life he could never reclaim, when Bella suddenly reached up and wrapped her small fingers tightly around his hand, her grip trembling yet firm, her blue eyes shining with both desperation and belief as she whispered, "Please don't let Mommy die. You're rich, right? You can save her." The words stabbed straight through the armor he had built over the years, and for the first time, he felt utterly powerless despite all his wealth and status. He looked down at her, then over at Lily, who clung to the edge of the hospital bed, her face buried against Sophia's blanket, and something inside him ignited, not anger, not panic, but a fire of responsibility that he had ignored for too long. Without a second thought, Dominic stood and marched out of the room with the determination of a man who would no longer be defined by regret. He cornered the attending physician just outside the ICU and said in a voice that cut through noise like steel, "I want her transferred immediately to the best wing, with the best care, and I don't care what it costs. I'll cover it all." The doctor hesitated, speaking in cautious terms about policy and risk, but Dominic silenced him with a glare that had once closed multi-million-dollar deals. "I'm not asking. I'm telling you." Within 20 minutes, a medical team was summoned, top specialists briefed, and Sophia was gently moved to the state-of-the-art VIP wing reserved for dignitaries and billionaires. As nurses adjusted monitors and specialists reviewed her file, Dominic stayed close, his hand never leaving hers. He sat beside her through every beep, every update, every grim nod from a doctor, and every quiet moment where her breath sounded too thin. Meanwhile, the girls were escorted to a cozy waiting suite filled with books, warm blankets, and soft lighting, but even there, they wouldn't rest until a nurse reassured them their mommy was in the best hands now. Dominic knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could fight for the present, and he could buy time, precious, fragile time she might need to make it back. Between consultations, he called his personal physician, his legal team, even a cardiologist from Switzerland who owed him a favor, and he didn't care if it looked excessive. Sophia wasn't just a name on a chart, she was the mother of his children, the woman who once believed in him more than he did himself, the only one who had never asked for anything but his presence, which he'd denied until now. He watched the specialists move with urgency, the medical jargon flying through the air like code he couldn't understand, but he stayed seated beside her, holding her hand, brushing her hair back, speaking softly about anything he could think of, memories, music, the smell of her favorite bookstore, the way she used to hum off-key when cooking eggs on Sundays. "I'm not going anywhere, Soph," he whispered more than once, hoping something in her soul could still hear him. Each hour felt like a test of endurance. He stopped checking his watch. Business meetings were ignored. Emails went unread. For the first time, he was completely present, consumed not by spreadsheets or success metrics, but by the quiet rhythm of a heart monitor and the fragile rise and fall of her chest. He replayed everything the way he had left, the silence that followed, the birthdays he missed, the moments he could never get back. And yet, instead of drowning in regret, he let the pain sharpen his focus. This was his second chance, and he wasn't going to fail again. Nurses came and went. New test results arrived. But Dominic remained unmoved, a sentinel at her bedside, his blue eyes fixed on her pale face, silently pleading with the universe to give her just one more day, one more breath, one more chance to wake up and see that he was here, finally here, and not planning to ever walk away again. When Bella tiptoed in later with a nurse and sat silently beside him, she reached for his hand again, her small voice barely a whisper. "Is she gonna be okay?" Dominic didn't know how to promise what he couldn't control, so instead, he squeezed her hand gently and said, "She's strong, just like you." The room was dim, quiet, and filled with the hum of machines, but between every beep and whisper, a different kind of heartbeat pulsed, the sound of a man beginning to learn what love really means, not in words or wealth, but in stillness, sacrifice, and the fierce, unwavering will to never let go. As the evening light filtered through the hospital blinds, casting golden shadows across the sterile floor, Dominic sat silently at Sophia's bedside, his eyes drawn to the small overnight bag tucked beneath her chair, soft, floral-printed, modest, but visibly worn from use. The nurse had placed it there after the transfer, mentioning it contained her personal belongings, and for the first time since she'd been moved to the private wing, Dominic reached for it with a mix of reverence and dread. His fingers gently unzipped it, half afraid of what ghosts might linger inside. Among folded clothes and a small lavender bottle of perfume was a weathered journal bound with a silk ribbon and a stack of faded envelopes, all addressed in the same delicate handwriting he had once known so well, his name written over and over, but never mailed. He stared at them, breath caught in his throat, the weight of those silent messages hitting him harder than any confrontation ever could. He untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter, dated just weeks after their breakup. The ink was slightly smudged, as if her tears had kissed the paper before her words did. "I waited for you today. I thought maybe you'd come back. I told myself I wouldn't cry, but I did anyway. Each line spilled a pain he had never allowed himself to imagine, not out of cruelty, but because he'd convinced himself that ending things had protected them both. But now, reading the raw vulnerability behind her neatly penned words, he realized how wrong he'd been. Another letter, dated 6 months later, carried the weight of an even deeper truth. I found out I was pregnant. With twins. I thought about calling you every day. But then I remembered how you looked at me that night like we were strangers. Dominic's eyes blurred as his trembling fingers clutched the edge of the page, his chest tightening with a grief no amount of wealth could buy him out of. She hadn't hidden their children out of spite. She had stayed silent because she thought he wouldn't want them, and maybe back then, he wouldn't have known how to. He read another, Bella looks like you. Same smile when she's proud. Lily carries your quiet. I wish you could see how they dance in the living room. I wish you knew they ask about you. Each letter unfolded more of the life he had missed. First words, birthdays, scraped knees, late-night fevers, all faced by Sophia alone, clinging to hope that one day he might change, but not wanting to risk breaking her daughter's hearts the way hers had been. The final letter was dated only weeks ago. I saw you on the cover of Forbes. You looked powerful, proud. I wonder if you've changed. I wonder if the man I loved is still there, buried beneath the one who left. Dominic placed the letter on his lap, unable to breathe through the guilt suffocating him. He had walked away chasing a version of success that now felt like ash in his mouth. The betrayal he once resented her for didn't exist. It had never been hers. It was his. For not calling. For not returning. For not fighting. The love he thought had ended had lived on without him, scribbled into midnight letters, sung in lullabies to daughters he didn't know he had, held in place by the thread of a woman who never gave up completely, even when he had. His hand moved slowly across the pile, gently pressing them together as if trying to put the pieces of her broken hope back in order. Each envelope carried a chapter of a life he'd never dared to read, and now that he had, he couldn't look away. He pressed the letters to his chest, closing his eyes, and let the weight of their truth pierce the last remnants of the man he used to be. Sophia hadn't needed his money, she had needed his presence. And when she couldn't have that, she gave everything she had left to 2 daughters who deserved far more. He looked over at her fragile form lying in the hospital bed, her breath still shallow but steady, and whispered through the lump in his throat, "You were right to keep writing. And I was wrong to stop listening." For the first time, Dominic didn't just want to make amends, he needed to. Not with grand gestures or expensive solutions, but with humility, with truth, with the patience to rebuild what he had once carelessly shattered. He turned to the doorway where Lily and Bella were curled in a chair fast asleep, hugging each other tightly, unaware that their father was finally reading the story of their lives for the very first time. As Dominic quietly tucked Sophia's final letter back into its envelope, he looked over at the twin girls sleeping soundly in the hospital chair, their cheeks pressed together, arms looped in instinctive protection and love, and something shifted in his chest, a need not born of guilt or duty, but of longing to be what they never had. By morning, after making arrangements with the doctors and ensuring round-the-clock care for Sophia, he gently lifted Lily and Bella into his car, promising them it would only be for a little while, that they'd be close, and that Mommy would be okay. The ride to his penthouse was quiet, the girls watching the towering skyline with sleepy eyes, unaware they were entering a world their mother once walked away from. When they stepped inside, the vast space swallowed them: polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass, sharp lines, and spotless surfaces that reflected a life too pristine to feel alive. Dominic paused in the doorway, suddenly seeing his home through their eyes, sterile, cold, silent. No toys, no photos, no signs of love or mess. It was the kind of space designed to impress investors, not raise children. Lily's shoes echoed softly as she walked to the window, her tiny reflection lost in the glass. "It's really high," she whispered. Bella tiptoed behind her, glancing around as if searching for something familiar, something warm. Dominic cleared his throat, awkwardly scratching his neck. "You hungry?" he asked, and both girls nodded gently. He had never cooked for anyone in his life, not even himself, but as he rolled up his sleeves in the chef's kitchen he'd barely used, something tender bloomed beneath his ribs. He opened drawers blindly, burned the toast, cracked an egg too hard, but when the girls giggled at his clumsy fumbling, it felt like sunlight pouring into a long-sealed room. He served scrambled eggs that looked more like a puzzle, juice in crystal glasses too large for their hands, and pancakes that stuck to the pan but they ate every bite like it was made by a five-star chef. Lily kicked her legs under the counter stool and said, "You're funny when you don't know what you're doing." He laughed, truly laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. The sound startled even him. After breakfast, they explored the penthouse, and he watched as they turned a sterile hallway into a racetrack with their socks, transformed throw pillows into castles, and repurposed a blanket into a superhero cape. Laughter filled corners that had never known sound. Dominic sat on the floor with them, his tie loosened, his shirt rumpled, and helped build a lopsided fort from couch cushions, a far cry from boardroom deals and bottom lines. When the afternoon faded into soft orange light, he gave them each a warm bath, clumsily braiding Bella's hair uneven, but she beamed with pride and drying Lily's curls with his own monogrammed towel, the same one that once only served luxury but now carried love. As bedtime approached, he led them into the guest room, but they stopped in the doorway and looked back. "Can we sleep close to you?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Without hesitation, he cleared space in the master bedroom and pulled the extra comforter over the king-sized bed. They curled up on either side of him, one resting her head on his chest, the other curled into his arm. The room was quiet, but not hollow. The silence now hummed with breath and heartbeat and belonging. He looked up at the ceiling and felt something soft and strange behind his eyes. As their breathing slowed into the rhythm of dreams, Dominic whispered, "I should have found you sooner," though neither of them stirred. The city buzzed beyond the glass, but inside that room, it was peace. Later, as he stepped out to dim the lights, he glanced at the framed art on his wall. Abstract, expensive, meaningless, and for the first time, it felt out of place. He picked up one of Lily's drawings left on the coffee table, a smiling stick figure with wild black hair, holding hands with two golden-haired girls and a woman in a pink dress, and without a second thought, he removed the art from the wall and taped her drawing in its place. It was crude, childish, imperfect, and it made the room feel like home. As the night deepened, he stood at the foot of the bed watching them sleep, their small faces lit by the moonlight spilling through the windows. His heart, once guarded and frozen, pulsed with a warmth he didn't think he deserved, but couldn't live without. The penthouse was still the same in structure, but every corner now whispered of change, love replacing loneliness, laughter chasing silence. And in that moment, Dominic realized he hadn't just brought his daughters into his world. They had brought him back to life. Morning tiptoed into the city as golden sunlight crept through the glass walls of the penthouse, spilling over the bundled silhouettes of two little girls asleep beside the man who had finally learned what it meant to hold on to something that mattered. But several miles away, in the quiet sanctuary of a hospital suite wrapped in beeping monitors and whispered prayers, another miracle stirred, one that neither Dominic nor the twins saw coming. The first flicker was subtle. Sophia's fingers twitching slightly against the blanket, her lips parting with a breath too shallow to be speech, and then, like dawn breaking through a storm, her eyelids fluttered open. Confusion painted her face as the sterile white ceiling greeted her, unfamiliar and cold. Panic rose in her chest like a wave threatening to crash. "The girls," she rasped. Her voice barely audible as her heart thundered behind fragile ribs. Where are the girls?" Her pulse spiked on the monitor, and a nurse rushed in just as Sophia tried to sit up, eyes darting around the room, wild and terrified, the maternal instinct louder than any pain. "Easy, ma'am," the nurse said gently, placing a calming hand on her shoulder. "You're safe. You've been unconscious for a few days. The girls are all right, I promise." But that wasn't enough, not for a mother who had lived 8 years measuring her strength by the heartbeat of her daughters. Tears welled up in her eyes, and before she could ask again, a shadow stepped into the doorway, one she hadn't seen in years but had never stopped imagining. Dominic walked in quietly, dressed down from his usual polished armor, his tie missing, sleeves rolled, eyes tired yet soft in a way she never remembered. His gaze met hers, and for a moment, time froze, not in nostalgia, but in overwhelming, paralyzing truth. "They're with me," he said softly, moving to her side, his voice steady despite the storm in his heart. "They're safe. And, they know." Sophia blinked rapidly, struggling to comprehend what he meant, her throat aching with questions she didn't have the strength to voice. Dominic gently took her hand, not with force, not with assumption, but with reverence, like he was reaching for something sacred. "I found the letters," he whispered, his thumb grazing her knuckles. "Every word. Every night you cried. Every moment you carried what should have been mine too." Her breath hitched. The room tilted. Shame, love, fear, it all collided inside her as tears slipped down her cheeks. "I didn't want to break them," she finally choked out, her voice barely there. "I didn't want to break you," he said in return, his eyes glistening. "But I did anyway." She turned her face away, too weak to argue, too full of grief to forgive, but not too far to feel the warmth of his presence. "They called me Daddy," he said with a soft, aching smile. "The moment they saw me, they already knew." Sophia gasped, covering her mouth as sobs shook her shoulders. She had feared this moment for years, feared rejection, feared regret, feared that meeting would come too late. But now, here he was, holding her hand like it was the only anchor he had left in the world. "You should have called," he murmured. "I should have come," she replied, and their silence echoed with all the time they'd lost. He leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and whispered, "I don't care about the past anymore. I just care that you're here, and I need you to stay." Sophia looked at him with watery eyes that once saw forever in his, unsure if she could trust again, but something in his voice, in the cracks of his words, felt different. Not rehearsed. Not convenient. Real. "The girls?" she asked again, softer this time, like a mother needing one final reassurance. Dominic smiled, lifting his phone from his pocket, showing a photo he had taken just before sunrise. Lily curled into Bella, both of them safe in his bed, tiny fists around the corners of his shirt. "They're home," he said, voice thick with emotion. "They turned it into one." Sophia's chest tightened with a cocktail of pain and hope. She had survived the hardest years of her life believing she had to protect her daughters from a man who once chose ambition over love, but now, that man had vanished. In his place stood someone humbled by time, wounded by truth, but determined to be better. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "Then, don't," he replied gently. "Let us do it together." She didn't answer right away, but her hand didn't let go either. And as the machines continued their steady rhythm and sunlight poured stronger through the windows, Dominic stayed by her side, not out of guilt, but because, for the first time in his life, he knew exactly where he belonged. Sophia's fragile hand still rested in Dominic's as the sterile quiet of the hospital room hovered between them like a fragile glass wall, one that could shatter with a single word. He had spoken promises, showed change, and stood by her side, but unspoken truths still festered in the shadows, aching for air. Her eyes, though heavy from exhaustion, suddenly glistened with a storm she could no longer hold back, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper, but every syllable carved itself deep into his heart. "You didn't want us." The words hit like a cold blade, slicing through the illusion of progress, forcing him to confront the version of himself he had buried beneath luxury and success. Her voice trembled, cracking like an old record as years of swallowed pain bled into every syllable. "I didn't keep them from you, Dominic. I was just waiting for you to care again." He opened his mouth, but the apology caught like thorns in his throat, useless against the weight of what she had lived through. "You walked away when I needed you the most," she continued, staring at the white ceiling as if it held all the memories she tried to forget. "You chose meetings over morning sickness, investors over ultrasounds, image over intimacy. I would have given you everything, and you still walked out the door like we were just another chapter to close." Dominic bowed his head, shame flooding every vein, his grip on her hand tightening like a man clinging to the edge of a cliff. "I was scared," he finally said, voice cracking. "I didn't know how to be a husband, let alone a father." Her gaze shifted slowly to meet his, eyes burning with equal parts love and fury. "But you knew how to be absent. You knew how to disappear while I sat alone at night, wondering how to stretch baby formula on a waitress salary. You knew how to miss birthdays, miss first steps, miss your daughters asking why their daddy was only in a picture frame." The breath in his lungs turned heavy and sour, the silence between her sentences louder than any scream. "I watched you become everything we dreamed of, powerful, respected, adored, and I kept hoping, maybe one day, you'd remember the girl who believed in you before the world did. Dominic's eyes blurred as he remembered those early days when she used to bring him coffee while he studied business plans at midnight, when her laughter lit up his broken apartment, when she celebrated his smallest wins like they were gold medals. And yet, when he got his first real break, he chose boardrooms over bedtime stories, deals over devotion. "I never stopped loving you," he whispered, tears falling despite himself. "I just didn't know how to hold on to what mattered." Sophia didn't flinch, didn't soften, but her voice wavered as she added, "And I didn't stop waiting. Every time one of the girls asked about you, I would show them that picture. I would tell them, one day, maybe he'll come home." She swallowed hard, her throat aching. "But you didn't. Not until now, and I don't know if I can open that door again, not for me, not for them if you're going to walk out like before." Dominic leaned closer, voice trembling with conviction. "I'm not that man anymore, Sophia. I missed everything. I missed us. I missed them. And I'll carry that for the rest of my life. But if you let me, I'll spend every day proving I belong here, not for show, not for redemption, but because this is where I should have been all along." Her chest rose with a sharp inhale, the pain still etched in every corner of her expression, but behind the hurt, a flicker of the girl he used to know remained, the one who loved deeply, forgave slowly, and hoped despite it all. "Words aren't enough anymore, Dominic," she murmured, closing her eyes. "Not after what we lost." He nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. "Then I'll show you. Not today, not just tomorrow, but for every yesterday I threw away." And as the machines continued their steady beeping beside her and the sun dipped lower through the windowpane, two broken hearts sat in silence, not as enemies, not yet as lovers again, but as two souls wounded by time and truth, quietly daring to believe that maybe, just maybe, healing had finally begun. The air between them in that quiet hospital room had been heavy with truth, and though Sophia hadn't said she forgave him, she hadn't pulled her hand away either, and that alone became the silent permission Dominic needed to begin again. The very next morning, after ensuring Sophia had everything she needed, he returned to the penthouse with something new in his heart, purpose not driven by profit, but by two blue-eyed girls who had unknowingly turned his world right side up. He knelt by their beds and gently woke them, whispering, "Time for school, princesses," in a tone foreign even to his own ears. Bella stretched first, her curls wild like spun sunshine, and Lily yawned as she blinked up at him, confused but comforted. "You're really taking us?" she asked. "I wouldn't miss it," he smiled. Breakfast was a beautiful disaster. He burned the toast, confused salt for sugar, and somehow managed to drop a pancake onto the floor, but the girls howled with laughter, and he found himself laughing with them, not caring that flour clung to his navy dress shirt like snow. He packed their lunches, awkwardly uneven peanut butter sandwiches and juice boxes he'd bought the night before after Googling lunch for 8-year-olds. At the school gate, parents glanced curiously at the tall man in the sharp blue coat crouching to kiss two little girls on their foreheads. He ignored them. Lily looked back before heading inside. "You'll be here when the bell rings?" He knelt down again. "Always." That word lingered in his mind the entire day. He cancelled meetings. Ignored his assistant's calls. Instead, he went home and sat in their pillow fort, trying to memorize the scent of crayons and the echo of their laughter that still hung in the air. That evening, he learned they loved strawberry milk, hated broccoli, and thought the cartoon with the talking dog was the best thing ever. He watched every episode, even when he didn't understand the jokes, because their giggles were better than any stock market rise. He tucked them in himself, not with robotic efficiency but with the clumsy tenderness of a man who had missed too many bedtime stories. Bella asked for a story, so he made one up about a lion who forgot he had a family until a pair of birds led him home. "Did the lion stay?" Lily asked sleepily. Dominic swallowed the lump in his throat. "Forever," he whispered. The penthouse slowly changed. Art came off the walls, replaced with finger paintings and school calendars. Expensive vases were moved higher to avoid accidental collisions during living room dance-offs. He stopped checking time during dinner. They started calling him Dad without hesitation, and he answered without flinching. He braided Bella's hair uneven, but she wore it proudly. He helped Lily with math, failing miserably, but she still called him smart. And every night, he peeked into their room just to make sure they were breathing, safe, warm, his. In boardrooms now, he found his thoughts drifting not to mergers or numbers, but to whether the twins remembered their library books or if Sophia had eaten. He feared only one thing, losing the very people who had stitched his broken pieces back together without ever asking for anything in return. The fear was quiet but constant, like a shadow that lingered just beyond the laughter. Every hug was a reminder of what he had almost missed forever. And so, one night, as the girls drifted to sleep and city lights twinkled outside, he stood in the doorway of their room, watching them breathe, tiny hands curled against the blankets, and whispered a promise not to them, but to himself. Whatever it takes. I'm not letting go. It wasn't a contract signed in ink. It was a vow written in pancakes and pinky swears, in bedtime kisses and math homework, in presents real, devoted, daily. For the first time in his life, Dominic Hayes understood legacy wasn't what he left in banks or buildings. It was what he built in the hearts of those who called him Daddy. Days passed gently after Dominic's silent vow, and as Sophia regained strength under the care of specialists, her eyes began to hold color again, her voice steadier with every conversation, her smile returning in fragile flickers whenever the girls bounded into her room with drawings and stories from school. When the hospital finally cleared her for discharge, she stood in the sunlight outside those sterile walls for the first time in weeks, breathing in the fresh air as if it were a new beginning, though her heart remained cautious, stitched together by healing but still unsure if it could endure one more tear. Dominic waited beside the car, holding the door open with a nervousness that surprised even him. There was no chauffeur today, no formality. He wanted her to feel safe, not managed. On the drive, the twins sang softly in the back seat, giggling as they mispronounced lyrics and corrected each other like they'd done it for years, and Sophia just watched them in the rearview mirror, overwhelmed by the life that had blossomed between them without her even asking for it. Instead of heading home, Dominic made a turn toward a quiet park just beyond the city, a small, grassy stretch surrounded by towering trees and the gentle rhythm of nature untouched by the city's noise. Just for a little while, he said, and Sophia, curious but tired, nodded. The sky was overcast, silver clouds stretching low and thick, and the scent of coming rain lingered in the air. They strolled slowly, the girls skipping ahead in their matching rain boots, splashing in leftover puddles and making up games involving leaves and imaginary kingdoms. Dominic walked beside Sophia in silence for a while, glancing at her from the corner of his eye as she tucked her coat tighter. When the first raindrops fell, soft and hesitant, the girls squealed with delight, spreading their arms as if inviting the sky to play. We should head back, Sophia said with a light laugh, brushing droplets from her cheeks, but Dominic gently touched her arm. Wait, he said, his voice low. She turned to find him slowly lowering himself onto one knee, right there in the grass, with no ring, no velvet box, only two tear-filled blue eyes looking up at her with more honesty than she'd ever seen in them. Her heart thudded, unsure if this was real or some aching dream. I don't have a diamond, he began, rain now tracing the collar of his shirt. But I have something I never had before. Clarity. And I don't want to keep chasing the man I used to be. I want to build something real, with you, with them. No fancy promises, just this. Can we start again? As a family? Sophia's breath caught. Every cell in her body screamed with memory, the pain of their past, the silence, the years of doing it all alone, but also the way he had changed, the way he now showed up, imperfect but present, trying with every ounce of himself. She hesitated, eyes stinging, unsure whether to run or to collapse into his arms. But before she could decide, two little voices interrupted the storm inside her. Lily and Bella tiptoed closer, their wet curls clinging to their faces, and with the most innocent certainty, they both whispered, "Say yes, Mommy." The world seemed to pause, even the rain softened as if waiting for her reply. Sophia looked down at Dominic, kneeling not out of tradition but out of genuine surrender. She remembered the nights she cried into her pillow, the letters she never sent, the strength she found in the dark, and how those same arms that once let go were now holding their daughters through the night. Slowly, she reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his face, brushing away the rain or maybe her own tears. "Only if we do it differently," she whispered. "With honesty. With presence. With no more walking away." Dominic nodded fiercely, rising to his feet as the girls clung to their parents' legs. "That's the only way I want it," he said. They stood there in the rain, soaked but whole, tangled in a moment that felt more sacred than any church altar or candlelit dinner. It wasn't a proposal built on perfection, it was a resurrection born from truth. And as Lily took one of Sophia's hands and Bella grabbed Dominic's, the four of them walked slowly through the drizzle, not toward a future they planned, but toward a beginning they had finally earned. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle as the newly bound family walked hand in hand through the park, their soaked clothes clinging to them, but none of them cared because the storm between them had finally passed. Back at the penthouse, Sophia settled into the once empty space that now echoed with life, unsure of what the future held but willing, at last, to walk toward it with him. She didn't say yes for diamonds or promises, she said yes for change, for the way Dominic looked at their daughters like they were his beginning and end, for the quiet steadiness she saw in him now where ego once lived. Their days became a slow, healing rhythm. Breakfast filled with laughter and syrupy messes, school drop-offs where Dominic memorized every goodbye, and evenings spent curled up together with storybooks and cocoa instead of silence. He never left her side unless it was to hold their daughters' hands. No boardroom, no deal, no empire was more important than dinner at 6 or dance recitals on Fridays. He learned Sophia's favorite tea, the one she drank when headaches crept in. He learned Lily's ticklish spot and Bella's habit of humming when she drew. He learned to apologize not just with words but with actions, in small ways that stitched together the trust he once broke. There were still moments when pain crept back in, when Sophia would glance at the clock and remember the nights she waited alone, or when Dominic would walk into a room and wonder how many firsts he'd missed, but now, they faced those ghosts together. One evening, he framed one of the twins' drawings and placed it above the fireplace where his company's first award once hung. "This is what matters," he said simply. Sophia watched him and smiled, not because he was wealthy or charming, but because he had finally learned to lead with his heart. He sold one of his companies, the one that once defined him, and used the proceeds to start a charity for single mothers, naming it SLB Foundation, for Sophia, Lily, and Bella. It wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about legacy. His schedule now had school lunches blocked off in red, dance competitions starred, and weekend family hikes circled in bold. He wasn't perfect, he still burned pancakes and sometimes forgot where the socks drawer was, but he showed up, every single day, with eyes that finally saw what mattered. Sophia began to soften, not all at once, but in the way her hand lingered longer in his, in the way she laughed louder when he messed up the bedtime story, in the way her eyes lit up when the girls said, "We're a family now, right, Mommy?" And one quiet night, long after the girls had fallen asleep and moonlight poured across their faces, Dominic sat beside Sophia on the couch, no television, no distractions, just the stillness of a life rebuilt. "I used to think success was having the world at my feet," he whispered, looking at the twins sleeping nearby. "But it's this. Right here. You. Them. This home." Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder, and he didn't move, just held her, breathing her in like a man who'd been underwater for too long. Seasons changed. The girls grew taller, their voices stronger, their world safer. They stopped calling him Mr. Dominic in public and just proudly said, "Dad." His staff, once used to terse emails and tight deadlines, now received photos of macaroni art, dance recital clips, and thank you notes written in glitter pen. And in the mirror, Dominic no longer saw the cold, haunted CEO, he saw a man finally whole, not because he had power, but because he had purpose. Years from now, when their daughters would look back, they wouldn't remember the penthouse or the cars. They'd remember how their father made pancakes on Sundays, how he never missed a bedtime, how he fought for their mother not with roses but with truth. And Sophia, once left behind, now stood beside him, not as someone he needed to earn back, but as the woman who taught him what real love meant. Under the same sky where their journey had begun with heartbreak, they now stood united, not perfect, not flawless, but healed. Dominic Hayes, the man who once chased fortune and lost everything that truly mattered, had finally discovered the greatest wealth of all, being the father to two beautiful girls who called him Daddy without hesitation, and the man worthy of a second chance in the eyes of the woman whose heart he once broke but now held with both hands. Redemption didn't come with applause, it came in bedtime kisses, family dinners, and whispered, "I love yous," beneath a roof filled with laughter. And in that home, not just walls but hearts stood strong, because love, no matter how late it arrives, is always worth answering when it finally knocks again.